Wei Yingwu, literary men gather in my prefecture on a rainy day. Outside, soldiers stand on guard with halberds. Inside this banquet hall, a balm of incense. Wind and rain carried in from the sea, amply cool pavilion and lake. All frets and fevers are soon dispelled as welcome guests begin to fill the hall. I'm ashamed to live in this grand residence when others' lives are so unsettled. So let's not bother with formalities, forget the customary protocols. Although fresh meat is forbidden by decree, there's fruit and vegetables to be enjoyed. Bowing to each other, let's take a cup of wine, look up and share our poems and responses. A joyful spirit surely frees the body, urging it to soar and circle with the wind. Here in this province, literature is flourishing. Today we have talent gathered in abundance. Now we have proved that in this great land there are higher aims than reaping wealth and taxes. So, first poem in this anthology by Wei Yingwu. You probably are hearing in the background, besides the birds chittering, some rain falling. So it's very appropriate. This wasn't done on purpose, but it's very appropriate that we have this rainy day background for this poem. Now, a brief introduction about Wei Yingwu. Like many of the poets that we've been talking about in this anthology, he is a scholar official. He lived in the High Tang period, that is basically most of the central and late years of the 8th century. He once served as, when he was young, he served as bodyguard to the brilliant emperor, and later on he passed the examinations, and he held a series of minor positions, some not so minor, in the central government. And of course he was sent to different provinces, to different prefectures as prefect. And in fact this poem is from one of those times when he is serving in office in the south. This poem, like the one we read before, well, the previous day, Juanjie's to the tax collectors, is a pretty narrative poem. So more than it has its part of description, but it's basically telling us something. And this something is a gathering of the literary men of the prefecture, of the local scholars, who come on a rainy day to enjoy conviviality with each other, to be honored and hosted by the governor of the province, and to enjoy in the small pleasures of the Chinese scholar officials. Listening to music or playing music, composing poems, reciting and dancing and singing those poems, maybe playing chess or having polite conversation. All of this accompanied by cups of wine, generous cups of wine, and perhaps some tidbits, something to eat. So this, like Juanjie's poem, is the poem of a prefect. So the scholar official is in a position of power and is explaining us what he is doing in this day. So the topic of the poem, like some of the poems which we have encountered before, is conviviality, a meeting of scholar officials to enjoy each other's company and to compose poetry. And at the same time, well, there's a slight symposiac element which always happens in the meetings of scholar officials. There will be wine drinking, happiness, and quaffing of drinks. Now, this poem is divided into a series of stanzas, at least in this translation. The first stanza introduces us to the place and the season, you could say. So we are in a pavilion. And this is an official state pavilion because there are soldiers on guard outside. There's incense perfuming the banqueting hall, and there's wind and rain that is creating a cool feeling in the pavilion. A curious thing to mention here, in Asia, well, not Asia, in some areas of China and Japan, as opposed to what happens in mainland Europe, the rainy season is in the middle of the summer. That's when it most rains, whereas in Europe, we're generally used to having rain in winter especially. But here, no. Rain is indicating that we're in the middle of the summer. So this is a nice thing. This rain will help to probably cool a little bit the scorching heat of a Chinese summer in the south of China, especially. Very humid. And guests are being welcomed. So the first stanza locates us in the pavilion in summer. Everything is ready to receive the literary men. In the second stanza, we first hear Wei Yingwu speaking almost in first person. He is deprecating himself, and he is saying, I know I'm ashamed of living with this luxury and opulence when so many people are suffering. This poem is written probably, after all, in the aftermath of the An Lushan rebellion. An important thing is that this is meant to be an informal gathering. So he is saying, let's not bother with formalities, forget the customary protocols. And, this is not empty words. Chinese society and Confucian society was very, very, very hierarchical, rigid. Everything was regimented. Meetings between scholars like this, like literary men being feasted by the local governor, these were exhaustively regulated in, for example, some of the Confucian sacred books. I'm thinking here of the Yili, the Rites and Etiquette, which specifies how a celebration of this type has to be, when music can be played, what types of food can be eaten, what is the number of bows that you have to give to the governor, where on the steps do you have to sit, and it's all very rigid, very ritualistic. But here, Wei Yingwu is clearly emphasizing, hey, let's not be too obsessive with following the rites and the formalities. This is just a convivial celebration, an informal celebration for enjoying each other and for composing poetry. Third stanza. So the third stanza starts to describe the party as such. Yeah? And it starts saying that there's food and drink. No meat, however. Fresh meat is forbidden by decree. I have no notes to this poem, so I don't know why specifically at this time meat was forbidden. Perhaps an emperor or a member of the royal family had died, and as a consequence, there were some fasting and some restrictions applied in the whole empire when one of these things happened. So mourning rituals are also very important in Chinese classical history. So maybe someone was in mourning, maybe the governor, or again, it could be mourning for the emperor or some of his relatives. This might be connected with Buddhism, though. I know that in the middle of the rainy season, it's traditional in Buddhist countries for the monks to retire completely and close off and dedicate themselves to meditation. So this, might be the lack of meat, but the abundance of fruit and vegetables might be connected with this, as there was a certain trend towards vegetarianism in Buddhist religious life. Anyway, we've got lots of fruits and vegetables. We're going to drink wine and share our poems. And this will allow us to escape from the constraints and the drudgery of everyday life and of everyday work and toil. A joyful spirit surely frees the body, urging it to soar and circle with the wind. Composing poetry frees our soul to explore the cosmos and, to get away from the world and roam the heavens. And finally, the last stanza summarizes the whole effect of this convivial gathering. Here in this province, literature is flourishing. Today we have talent gathered in abundance. Now we have proved that in this great land there are higher aims than reaping wealth and taxes. Although he is a political figure, Wei Yingwu was emphasizing how empire is not an end in itself. The end of empire is not just power for power's sake or the accumulation of wealth and power in the hands of a ruler or of his ministers, not wealth and taxes. It's creating meetings, literary meetings like this. This is truly civilization showing its face. The purpose of conviviality and of human society is civilization, enjoying the cultured, the refined aspects, the aesthetic experience of human life. And that's the greatest thing. We might assume that the poet is flattering a little bit those local scholars who came to join him with the talent gathered in abundance. Confucianism also tends to sponsor an from the Western perspective, excessive, overtly manifested politeness, and which tends on the hyperbolic from time to time, and which can feel hypocritical. But I can feel that here Wei Yingwu is at least partly being sincere. Like he appreciates all those local writers, and he appreciates being able to enjoy the fruits of high culture with them in an empire which, up to a certain point at least, has returned to some peace and prosperity. So that will be all for today. This is, as I said at the beginning, the first of 5 poems by Wei Yingwu in this block of the book. So he has 7 poems in total. So the vast majority are pentasyllabic gushi. So probably this is his most representative genre, or at least that was thought by the compiler of this book. I have heard that this poet, Wei Yingwu, is generally seen to be a Tang dynasty equivalent of Tao Chien, who was a poet from the period of fragmentation, who mainly wrote poems on the joys of the retired life, not the retired life of a hermit, but the retired life of a scholar official, who just enjoys reading books, living the life of the small gentry in the countryside, working the fields, and listening to music and reading and composing poetry. So I imagine that some of the poems by Wei Yingwu will be in that vein in the future.